After years of helping new immigrants navigate the Aliyah process, patterns emerge in the mistakes people make during their pilot trips. These are not mistakes of bad intentions or inadequate preparation, but mistakes of assumption, of expectation, of focusing on the wrong things while overlooking what actually matters. Understanding these common errors before you leave can help you avoid them, ensuring that your pilot trip provides genuine clarity rather than misleading impressions that will only complicate your decision later. The first and most common mistake is treating the pilot trip as a vacation with some practical appointments sprinkled in. People arrive with itineraries that look like tour group schedules, with multiple cities visited per day and famous sites prioritized over neighborhood exploration. They check into nice hotels in central locations convenient for tourism, but far from any neighborhood they might actually live in. They eat in restaurants recommended by travel websites rather than the local spots where residents actually gather. At the end of 2 weeks, they have beautiful photographs and fond memories, but almost no information relevant to whether they should actually make Aliyah. Avoid this mistake by ruthlessly eliminating anything from your itinerary that does not serve your primary purpose. If you have never been to Israel before, you might allow 1 day, perhaps 2, for the tourist experiences that help you understand the country's history and significance. But a pilot trip is not the time to float in the Dead Sea or explore the caves of Rosh Hanekra. Those experiences will be available to you for the rest of your life if you choose to live here. This trip has a specific purpose, and respecting that purpose means making hard choices about how to spend your time. The second mistake is visiting only one neighborhood, or only neighborhoods recommended by a single source. People hear from a friend that Ra'anana is perfect for families, so they spend their entire pilot trip in Ra'anana without ever exploring Kfar Saba or Hod HaSharon or Netanya or any of the other communities in the same region that might suit them equally well or better. Others read online that a particular neighborhood is the place for serious young professionals, or for Orthodox families, or for retirees, and they take this as gospel without questioning whether the characterization is accurate or whether they actually fit the profile described. Avoid this mistake by starting with a wide net and narrowing deliberately. Make a list of at least 5 or 6 different areas before your trip, representing different regions and different types of communities. Visit all of them, even the ones you think you will hate, because your assumptions about what you want may prove to be wrong once you experience the reality. The pilot trip that confirms your initial instincts is valuable, but the pilot trip that surprises you and opens possibilities you never considered is often more valuable still. The third mistake is making decisions based on a single visit at a single time. A neighborhood feels different at 8 in the morning than at 8 in the evening. It feels different on a Tuesday than on Shabbat. It feels different in summer heat than in winter rain. People visit a neighborhood once, form an impression, and cross it off their list or add it to their short list without recognizing how incomplete their information is. Avoid this mistake by visiting your serious contender neighborhoods multiple times at different times of day and different days of the week. Wake up early and walk through the neighborhood as residents head to work and school. Return in the early afternoon when the streets may be quieter. Come back in the evening when people return home and gather in parks and cafes. If possible, extend your pilot trip long enough to experience both weekday rhythms and Shabbat in the same neighborhood. A single snapshot can be deeply misleading about what daily life in a place actually looks like. The fourth mistake is relying too heavily on other English speakers for information and community. The Anglo community in Israel is welcoming and generous with its time, and it is natural to gravitate toward people who share your language and cultural background. But if you spend your entire pilot trip within Anglo circles, you will get a skewed picture of what life in Israel actually involves. The Israel that Anglos describe is filtered through their experience of being immigrants, and while that experience is relevant to your own future, it is not the whole story. Avoid this mistake by intentionally seeking out Israeli perspectives. Ask to meet neighbors, colleagues, and friends of your Anglo contacts. Visit schools where the student body is primarily Israeli rather than immigrant. Strike up conversations with shopkeepers and taxi drivers and fellow passengers on the bus. Your Hebrew does not need to be perfect for these interactions. Many Israelis speak some English, and those who do not will often find ways to communicate if you make the effort. The goal is not to avoid the Anglo community, which will likely be an important part of your support system, but to ensure that your picture of Israel includes Israelis in substantial numbers. The fifth mistake is making decisions based on what other people think you should want, rather than what you actually want. Parents make Aliyah for their children and choose neighborhoods based entirely on school quality, without considering whether they themselves will be happy there. Young professionals choose neighborhoods that seem impressive without considering whether the lifestyle appeals to them. Religious families choose communities based on denominational labels without visiting to see whether the actual community fits their personality. Avoid this mistake by being honest with yourself about your priorities, even if they are not the priorities you think you should have. If you care more about being near good restaurants than near good schools, acknowledge that and let it inform your search. If you know you will be miserable in a suburban environment, no matter how safe and family-friendly it is, do not force yourself into one because it seems like the responsible choice. Aliyah is hard enough without starting from a neighborhood that does not suit who you actually are. The sixth mistake is assuming that what matters in your home country will matter the same way in Israel. People who prioritize large homes and private yards in North America discover that such properties are rare and prohibitively expensive in most of Israel. People who are accustomed to quiet suburban streets are unprepared for the noise and density of typical Israeli neighborhoods. People who expect customer service to operate the way it does back home are frustrated by interactions that feel brusque or inefficient by their standards. Avoid this mistake by entering your pilot trip with genuine openness to different ways of living. You do not have to accept everything you encounter as superior or even acceptable, but you should try to understand why things work the way they do before deciding that you cannot live with them. Some things that feel like deal breakers on first encounter turn out to be minor inconveniences once you adjust, while other things that seem manageable prove to be genuinely intolerable. The pilot trip is your opportunity to discover which is which before you commit. The seventh mistake is trying to make a final decision during the pilot trip itself. People put enormous pressure on themselves to emerge from 2 weeks in Israel with complete certainty about whether to make Aliyah, when to make it, and exactly where to live. This pressure leads to hasty decisions, to ignoring doubts that deserve attention, and to a level of stress that makes the trip miserable rather than productive. Avoid this mistake by reframing what the pilot trip is meant to accomplish. A pilot trip is for gathering information and forming impressions. It is for narrowing your options and identifying questions that require further research. It is for testing your assumptions and updating your mental map of what life in Israel might look like. A pilot trip is not for making final decisions. Those decisions can and should come later, after you have returned home and processed what you experienced, discussed it with family members who were not on the trip, and perhaps consulted with Aliyah advisors who can help you interpret what you learned. Give yourself permission to leave Israel with open questions. The goal is not certainty, but clarity about what you know, what you do not know, and what you still need to figure out. The eighth mistake is ignoring the practical realities of employment and income. People fall in love with a neighborhood without considering whether they can afford to live there, or whether they can find work that will sustain their lifestyle, or whether the commute from that neighborhood to potential employment centers is realistic. They assume that professional credentials from their home country will transfer smoothly to Israel and are shocked to discover that licensing requirements may force them to start their careers over from scratch. Avoid this mistake by making employment and financial planning a central part of your pilot trip. Meet with professionals in your field who have made Aliyah and ask them honestly about the job market and earning potential. Research salary expectations and cost of living in specific neighborhoods rather than relying on national averages that may not apply to your situation. Visit the offices of professional licensing bodies and understand exactly what will be required to practice your profession in Israel. If the numbers do not work, no amount of love for a neighborhood will make your Aliyah sustainable. The final mistake is allowing a single bad experience to derail your entire assessment. People have a rude encounter with a bus driver, or a frustrating experience with bureaucracy, or a landlord who seems dismissive, and they extrapolate from that single incident to conclude that Israel is hostile or impossible or not for them. Every country has rude people and frustrating systems. Every neighborhood has residents who are unwelcoming to strangers. A pilot trip is too short to provide a representative sample of experiences, and giving undue weight to negative encounters distorts your overall impression. Avoid this mistake by taking each experience as a single data point rather than a definitive judgment. Note the bad experiences alongside the good ones. Try to understand whether what you experienced is typical or anomalous. Ask your contacts whether they have had similar encounters and how they interpret them. Reserve judgment until you have accumulated enough data points to identify genuine patterns rather than random variation. The Israel you encounter in 2 weeks is not the Israel you will live in for decades. Give the country and yourself the grace of an incomplete picture.